So let us listen closely because what we are discussing today is difference between a productive campaign and a catastrophic terminal event. A blast furnace is a living thermodynamic giant. When its internal chemistry falters, it doesn't just slow down, it can literally collapse from within. So today we are dissecting the anatomy of a furnace slip. By the end of this session, you will gain three critical deliverables. First, the ability to diagnose cohesive zone collapse before it manifests as a physical hang. Second, a master level understanding of the self-propagating chill loop. And third, a battle tested protocol for rapid mitigation to prevent a chilled hearth. So look at the cross section on your screen. Notice the inactive stack at the top the and that orange line sagging dangerously low towards the tier. That is your compromised cohesive zone. When that architecture fails, you lose blast penetration and risk a total system freeze. Understanding these signals is your only defense against the low silicon threat. To prevent this collapse, we must view silicon not just as a chemistry specification but as our primarily thermal radar. And this is going to have a lot of role subsequently. As you can see, this in this business we use silicon to see through the steel shell. On the left, you see a healthy thermal state. The cohesive zone is elevated, and the red arrow shows a steady high volume of gas in the high temperature zone above 1400 degrees centigrade. This allows volatile SiO gas prolonged contact time to react with carbon, resulting in high silicon over 0.5% and a stable hot metal temperature. Now look at the right. This is a dangerous state. The cohesive zone has dropped and the high temperature volume has shrunk. The so what factor is critical? When the thermal state drops, SiO gas contact time is severely restricted. Silicon drop rapidly, often approaching less than 0.3%. This chemical shift is the ultimate early warning that your internal architecture is collapsing. If you ignore a dropping silicon trend, you are essentially flying behind into a thermal storm that will eventually land on your two ears. Once that silicon drop and the zone sag, the furnace enter a lethal self-accelerating cycle. So as you can see, when the cohesive zone drop, the furnace enter what I call the thermal death spiral. So it start at step 1, the cohesive zone drop due to low thermal input signaled by that low silicon we just discussed. In step 2, a breeze form and the burden slip causing a violent collapse. This leads to step 3 where the layer structure is destroyed, gas flow is impeded and channeling forms finally which have a lot of adverse effect on aerodynamic behavior of the furnace. So finally look at the step 4 which is a direct reduction spike. Because the gas reduction fails, oxygen must be removed via heat consuming direct reduction. This is so what factor, that is the direct reduction violently uh, deviate from the existing coke heat to strip oxygen away, chilling the furnace even further. These create a feedback loop that drives the cohesive zone completely onto the tuer. You are not just losing heat, the furnace is actively consuming its own thermal reserve to survive a chemical failure. To break this spiral, we must be able to read the subtle diagnostic signal before the collapse become violent, and which is very important during the such type of process. So dashboard, as you can see, that all manages that we do not wait for the sleep, we anticipate it. such type of low silicon incident. This dashboard categorize our intel into three tiers. The row 1 shows the leading indicators. Watch your gas utilization or ETA-CO. If it crashes from 49 to 36, your permeability is falling or failing, we can say. Row 2, the orange bar track physical indicator, high blast pressure variability and sudden localized high cooling losses where heat spike double their normal values. Means boss gases being deflected to the wall because internal coke slates are blocked. Finally, the red bar shows the lagging indicators, hot metal temperature dropping below 1390 and silicon dropping aggressively. The so what factor here is that by the time you see the red indicator, the cohesive zone has already dropped. Immediate intervention is no longer optional. It is mandatory for the survival of the furnace hearth and your refractory lining. Once the signal from turned red, we must shift immediately into phase 1 mitigation to stabilize the furnace aerodynamic. Now coming to the phase 1 mitigation, where stabilizing aerodynamics is our key factor. So coming to our this reading diagnostic cycle. Uh, so here when a chilling sleep sequence is identified, as you can see, uh, the first rule is do not force production. You must break the cycle immediately. That is, first to maintain the continuous casting to keep liquid level low. High liquid exert upward buoyancy on the dead man, further compressing the cohesive zone and increasing blast pressure. Action 2 is a defensive, which is aggressively cut volume, blast volume. We decrease wind to minimum required to maintain the fuel injection. So this requires upward pressure and allow time for melting to restore heat transfer from the boss gas. And finally, action 3 is the maximize heat input. We push hot blast temperature to their limits and completely cut the blast moisture to 0%. The so what factor is stabilizing the cohesive zone by cutting the wind and boosting the heat. We stop the hanging cycle and give the furnace thermal room it needs to begin melting the unmolten ore scab. Aerodynamic stability is only the first step. We must also physically restore the furnace thermal architecture. And this is all about phase number 2. As we have already discussed phase 1, all the points, and coming to now phase 2, where, which is on restoring this thermal architecture. So once the wind is cut, we move to the phase 2, rebuilding the thermal reserve from both ends. That is, top down action involves charging coke blank. This replaces lost reserve of coke below the melting zone and physically lift the root of cohesive zone back away from the tuyeres. Simultaneously, look at the slag adjustment box. We lower basicity by charging siliceous lampor to bring extra silica into the furnace. The so what factor is the factor is survival. In a cold furnace, high basicity slag will freeze inside the furnace, blocking flow. So lowering basicity ensure the slag remains fluid and castable even at low temperature. Finally, we boost coal injection by approximately 20 kg per ton to increase the reductant rate immediately. We are essentially overfueling the hearth to ensure that any material reaching the tuyer can be fully processed and melted. If these mitigation fail or are executed too late, the physical cost of inaction is devastating. And our next slide, which is on cohesive collapse, about which we just talked. So this is what happens when you force a cold furnace. Look at the red cross mark on the diagram. If unmitigated, the dropping cohesive zone land directly on the tuer, unmolten ore scab drop into the raceway physically blocking the blast. So this is the tuer blockage. Because the central gas flow is blocked by the collapsing zone, high pressure, high temperature wash gas is violently deflected outward against the furnace wall. This causes a massive refractory wear and peeling, which can permanently shorten your campaign life. Furthermore, the permeable active coke zone is entirely extinguished by the semi-molten sludge. The so what factor is a total loss of process control. You are no longer running a furnace, you are presiding over a cooling mass of iron and slag that is destroying the very vessel that contain it. This internal chaos culminate in the absolute worst case scenario for any iron maker, the chilled hearth. So let us uh, talk about the consequences of the chilled hearth. So we have reached the point of no return. On the left, you see the internal freeze, slag and iron solidify, and the critical connection between the tuer and taphole is lost. Drainage stop entirely and all tuer filled with slag. But look at the external catastrophe. This is a real world blowout with nowhere to drain, rising liquid hot metal back up directly into the tuer and blowpipe. This causes an explosive catastrophic blowout of gas, coke and molten metal onto the tuer platform, melting wiring, piping and potentially the furnace shell itself. The so what factor here is absolute recovery from a chilled hearth require a massive prolonged downtime of a month and millions in repair cost. This is why we monitor silicon so carefully. So we are not just chasing a chemistry target, we are preventing a multi-million dollar industrial disaster. So to ensure we never reach this terminal state, we must live by the three golden rules of sleep prevention. So coming to our one of the most important slide on the golden rules of sleep prevention. So we conclude with the three pillars that we keep our furnaces upright and our hearts hot. Pillar one is silicon is your radar. Never treat dropping silicon is a simple chemistry variant. It's a mechanical warning that your cohesive zone is collapsing toward the tuer. Coming to pillar number two, erratic descent equals bridge formation. Slippery burden movement and wild blast pressure swing means a violent slip is imminent. And most importantly, pillar number three, never force production. If the thermal state drops and a slip cycle begins, act fast. Cut the wind, drop the basicity, and charge those coke blank. You cannot push production through a chilled hang. You can only destroy your furnace trying. So master these signals, respect the thermodynamics and keep your cohesive zone elevated.